We've seen two elections in the past couple of decades where climate change alarmism was significant, and they both saw the coalition lose office. One was in November 2007, coming towards the end of a devastating drought. That meant that activists and politicians linked climate warnings to the here and now. And we've seen that again in the lead up to last weekend's election, with recent bushfires and floods used in political messaging.
They're backing their mates and putting your lives at risk. The Greens put people first.
We're seeing the perils of climate change happen around us.
Extreme bushfire events, extreme flooding events, the deterioration of the Great Barrier Reef.
And this is just the beginning.
So much for the land of droughts and flooding rains. This sort of alarmism is over the top, as I've demonstrated and said on this program repeatedly. And that remains the case, even if you accept what the IPCC's latest report has said about human greenhouse gas emissions likely increasing the chance of natural disasters. This includes increases in the frequency of concurrent heat waves and droughts on the global scale, says the IPCC. Fire weather in some regions, that's said with some high confidence. Fire weather in some regions of all inhabited continents, said with medium confidence. And compound flooding in some locations, medium confidence on that finding too. So that's what the IPCC says. It's the Bible, of course, of the climate alarmists. So those qualified conclusions are as strong as you can get scientifically. So why do we see so much alarmism, and what impact does it have on our society? One person who's followed these issues closely for decades is Lloyd at The Australian, and he joins me now. Graham, thanks for talking to us again. When we get into these debates, the climate change debate gets horribly caught up, doesn't it, between science, politics and reality?
That's right, Chris. If you look at the phenomena of how climate science and climate politics is played, really there's science, there's politics, and the two are not necessarily the same thing. You've got to say, with the latest election, obviously there's a big desire in the community for something to be done, action to be taken on climate change, and there's a great deal of concern about the bushfires and floods and things. And to an extent, those issues have been conflated. As you expressed, the IPCC report shows that there's a body of work in this area, but there's no absolute conclusions. It's an ongoing search. However, the reason people have arrived at the situation they have is there has been a relentless campaign to link extreme weather events with climate change and extrapolate it out to a very frightening scenario. And the results are showing that this is causing a great deal of mental health issues and concern, particularly among young people, and it's getting worse.
Yeah, well, you only have to talk to young people, and obviously what they're taught at school and what they see in the media, they're deeply, deeply worried. As you write, the catastrophisation of the weather has been the most potent weapon in the debate. Sad polar bears, you write, tug at the heartstrings, but bushfires and floods make it personal. And the perception that's created is that we're making all these horrible things more common and more fierce, and you know, basically we're all going to burn and die in the future. People use that sort of rhetoric. It's terribly unscientific. It's absolutely unrealistic. And apart from polluting the political debate, you're saying it actually harms young people.
Yeah, it's certainly showing that young people are fearful of the future. They're depressed about the state of the world. They can't see a lot of reason for continuing, which is a terrible state of affairs. Certainly, there's very little perspective given to the frequency and extent of these sort of weather events and other phenomena in the past to give some context to it. The politics has been relentless, and the height of it, I guess, is through organisations such as Extinction Rebellion, which are basically saying, look, we're all going to be extinct.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's just terrible rhetoric. I should point out for our viewers, of course, that you're a lifelong environmentalist and you follow the science and you know it and understand it clearly, and so you care deeply about these issues. It's like, I mean, back before any of this was talked about, I was a park ranger, for crying out loud. I mean, I love the environment. You've got to keep it factual, though, and you got a lovely phrase here where you say, unfortunately, despite all the science and uncertainty and ongoing research and findings, the dominant narrative has become one of natural retribution from nature for the sins of humankind. It's an almost religious view to this issue, isn't it?
It is. There is a quasi-religious dimension to the whole thing, and as you say, I've been passionately involved with environmental issues for a long period of time, and my concern is that when you make it an existential crisis, people are prepared to do anything in the name of saving nature, and often those things have extraordinarily detrimental impacts on nature itself. So you're basically killing it to be kind. It's a very precarious position and one the world's sort of heading headlong down.
Now, this is where it gets to public knowledge, information, public ignorance, I suppose, as well, the role of the media and our education systems, because people have misunderstandings about the nature of the threat and the nation of what policy interventions can do. And I just want to show some data that we used during the campaign, some Compass polling that asked Australians what percentage of global emissions they thought Australia contributed. And the average response was 10%. On average, people exaggerated Australia's contribution to the global problem tenfold. We, of course, produce about 1.2% of global emissions and shrinking. So apart from, Graham, people thinking we do more damage to the globe than we do, this also makes people think that we can actually change the climate from policy decisions in Australia. Now, I'm all for Australia doing its bit, its proportionate share of a global challenge, but we shouldn't fool ourselves that voting for a teal in Kooyong is going to stop bushfires and floods in Queensland. It's absurd.
Well, the reality is, of course, nothing is going to stop floods and fires in Queensland.
Exactly, yeah.
But Australia has a very insular view of its position in the world across a lot of fronts, and climate change is no different. We are a respected society. We are held in high regard in international forums that look at this stuff, and people who are engaged understand that this is a very big problem. Because if you want to reduce CO2 emissions, the place that you have to do it is in China and India and other places that are growing strongly and need to burn fossil fuels to build their economies. Australia can punch above its weight in areas, sort of replacements for those things, but the truth is they haven't been developed yet. And I think over decades those solutions will come about, but they certainly will be hard fought. And there could be a lot of errors along the way.
Yeah, there's got to be a lot of technological development. We're not going to do this with wind turbines and batteries, and we can't pretend that's the case. But, Graham, we're almost out of time, so a big question, if you give me a very short answer to it, though. Of course, the IPCC collates all the science, but it produces a lot of material to go into the public debate too. Is it part of the problem? Is its material too emotive?
Well, there's two things. There's the reports, and then there's the executive summaries for government. And often on a close reading, they're quite different.
Yeah, exactly. Go to the scientific stuff for a more sober analysis, and be a bit wary about some of their more emotive, alarmist publications. Great to talk to you again, Graham. Cheers.
Good on you. Thanks, Chris.
Graham Lloyd, who's the environment editor at The Australian.